Okay, so picture this. You're born with, well, everything. You've got a title, you've got incredible wealth, and your future is already perfectly planned out for you. You're going to be a military hero, a ruler, the whole deal. Now, imagine just walking away from all of it. That's the absolutely incredible story of Aloysius Gonzaga, a young man who literally traded a kingdom for a life of service. So let's dive in and try to figure out how and why he made such a radical choice.
I mean, this is the core conflict that just defines his entire life, right? On one side, he's the heir to this powerful, powerful dynasty. He's destined for glory in the eyes of the world. And on the other side, he becomes a servant to the sick, the poorest of the poor. So how does someone even make a choice like that? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we've got to understand the world he was born into first.
Right, so to really get his choice, we have to get the world he came from. And we're not talking about just any noble family here. No, the Gonzagas were a major power player in Renaissance Italy. I mean, a real force to be reckoned with. And Aloysius, he was their future.
So from the second he was born, his path was basically carved in stone. As the eldest son, he was set to inherit this territory that was, for all intents and purposes, its own little kingdom. His family? Oh, they were huge patrons of the arts, living right at the heart of Renaissance culture. And his dad, who was a soldier himself for the super-powerful King Philip II of Spain, had this one crystal-clear vision for his son. He wanted him to be a famous military hero.
But here's the thing. While his dad is busy planning out his military career, Aloysius is going through this huge internal shift. Right in the middle of all this power, all this excess, something completely different starts to grow inside him. A totally different kind of ambition.
And it started crazy early. I mean, at just 7 years old, he has what's described as a profound spiritual awakening. By the time he's 9, he's already decided, just to himself, that the military life is not for him. So instead of playing with toy soldiers, by age 11, he's actually out teaching catechism to the poor kids in his town. And then at 13, he gets sent straight into the lion's den, the very heart of worldly power, the Spanish court of King Philip II.
And the irony here is just perfect. His father's grand plan completely backfired. He sends his son to the most powerful court in Europe to train him up for leadership, but the whole experience does the exact opposite. All the politics, the backstabbing, the ambition, he just saw it as empty. It actually made his desire for a different life even stronger. His heroes weren't the kings and the courtiers, no way. He found them in the pages of books about the lives of saints.
So all this disillusionment, it leads him to make his final decision. He wants to become a Jesuit. He wants to join the Society of Jesus. But telling his father, the Marquis, oh man, that set the stage for the single biggest fight of his young life, a really personal battle of wills that was going to drag on for years. 4 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how long he had to fight his own father to follow his calling. From the time he's a young teen until he's 18, he's just locked in his struggle with the most powerful man in his world. And his dad just could not wrap his head around why his heir would throw away everything, the title, the wealth, the power, for a life of, poverty and obedience. I mean, his father pulled out all the stops. He brought in other important people to pressure him, trying to get him to choose a more normal path. He used every argument in the book, every emotional trick he could think of. But against all that power, all that influence, Aloysius just didn't budge. He was completely unwavering. He only had one weapon in this fight, but it was a powerful one, his conviction.
And in the end, conviction won. At just 18 years old, Aloysius formally signed away all his rights to the family title, to the inheritance. He passed it all on to his younger brother. And just like that, he was finally free. He headed to Rome and joined the Jesuits.
But that new life of quiet study and prayer, it wasn't going to last very long. Because in 1591, a terrible plague swept through Rome. The city was completely overwhelmed. So in response, the Jesuits opened a hospital to care for the sick and dying. And Aloysius, you guessed it, volunteered immediately.
And this wasn't some symbolic gesture, okay? This was intense, hands-on, radical service. This is a young man who could have been ruling a kingdom. And what's he doing instead? He's out on the streets, literally begging for food and money for the sick. He's physically carrying plague victims out of the alleyways and into the hospital. Then he's washing them, he's feeding them, and he's preparing them for what comes next. It was incredibly dangerous work, totally selfless, and everyone knew the risks involved. While he was caring for the patients, making their beds, he contracted the plague himself. He had knowingly, willingly walked right into the heart of the epidemic to help people, and, well, he paid the ultimate price for it.
He was only 23, just 23 years old, and even though he actually survived the first hit of the plague, a fever just lingered and left him too weak to ever really recover. He had traded what could have been a long, comfortable life for a short one that was just packed with meaning.
And according to the people who were there with him at the end, they said that as he was holding a cross, his very last word, his last breath, was the name of Jesus, the name that had guided his whole life, really, right from that first spiritual inkling he had as a little kid.
So, what do we make of this? What's the legacy of the prince who chose poverty? Well, his story has stuck around for more than 400 years, and I think it's because it's just this powerful example of conviction, of selfless compassion, and it really resonates with young people who are trying to figure out their own big life choices.
And it makes sense, right? Because of his own journey, he eventually became the patron saint of young people, specifically teenagers and seminarians, those studying to be priests. He's really seen as this source of inspiration for anyone who's trying to find their own true calling, especially when the world is pushing them in a different direction. At the end of the day, his legacy is pretty simple, but it's also incredibly powerful. He's this timeless example of someone who chose their personal conviction over worldly comfort, and who dedicated their life, no matter how short it turned out to be, to serving other people.
And his story really leaves us with this big question, one that's just as relevant today as it was way back in the 16th century. What does it mean to find your purpose when the world has already chosen one for you? It kind of challenges all of us, doesn't it? To really look at the paths laid out in front of us and to think about the courage it takes to maybe, just maybe, forge our own.